Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. Let's talk about market schizophrenia. That's right. And market collateralized schizophrenia obligation bonds. Are they in the offing? Stacy Herbert, talk to me, talk to me, talk to me.
Yes, it's austerity measures one day, it's stimulus measures the next. IMF, global economy faces a threatening downward spiral. This is Christine Lagarde, the new IMF chief, and she says Europe needs to take its foot off the fiscal brake and shift to growth-intensive measures until the danger has passed, insisting that Germany has leeway to stimulate demand.
Right, so she's saying, no, austerity measures are bad.
For the West, it is.
Well, this isn't the IMF just recommended for Greece austerity measures.
That's correct. I'm not sure if she includes them in the West.
Well, but the prescription that the IMF is offering is schizophrenic. They should just offer schizophrenia-backed bonds and float those on some global exchange that pays off on how schizophrenic the IMF can be.
That's right. Well, it is also this story, this ongoing story between savers versus speculators. And as the article points out, her comments are certain to cause fury in Berlin, where the IMF is viewed as an agent of Keynesians and French mischief. Mrs. Lagarde was French finance minister until 2 months ago.
Well, yeah, Germany is sitting on a potload of money, and all these other countries want in on it. And, of course, the Germans are savers. The French are profligate spenders, and they want Germany's money, as do all the other countries. But Germany is a saver. Don't take Germany's money.
Well, remember, it's all-out war, Max, and in fact, that's in my next headline, all-out war, bankers versus everybody else. So we know Christine Lagarde is now an agent for these bankers, of course. And Nassim Taleb is pointing out that for the American economy and for many other developed countries, including all of Europe, the elephant in the room is the amount of money paid to bankers over the last 5 years. In the United States, the sum stands at an astounding $2.2 trillion.
Yeah, and I just saw a story that CEOs of all companies in America and bankers are lobbying Washington to pass a new law that would make it so that they would not have to disclose their pay and bonuses to anybody, no regulatory authority, not to the SEC. Just keep all that information private, how they're raping and pillaging.
Not just their bonuses, they're actually their income. And this was in the Washington Post where they were talking about breakaway wealth. And they're saying that this is just the wealthy, the top 0.1%. And 99% of Americans think they're part of that, but it's really only 0.1%. But they're becoming wealthier by taking the wealth from the rest of the population. As Nassim Taleb points out, over the next 10 years, you're going to see at this same rate, if you extrapolate this rate of wealth that the bankers are taking, it's going to be another $5 trillion over the next decade. That $5 trillion is not money invested in building roads, schools, and other long-term projects, but is directly transferred from the American economy to the personal accounts of bank executives and employees.
I think it should really take the other approach, that when the CEOs and bankers are caught raping and pillaging, stealing money as they're doing, they should have to go door to door in the neighborhoods that they live and tell their neighbors that they are serial financial terrorist offenders. This is the Serial Financial Terrorist Offender Law.
But of course, the way to fight this financial war is in that image accompanying this story, and that's Max Keiser's Silver Bullets, Crash JP Morgan, buy silver. And along with these precious metals, that takes us to this next headline in this financial war, this ongoing financial war. China knows that the U.S. government and its allies in Western Europe strive to suppress the price of gold, and the U.S. government knows that China knows, according to a 2009 cable from the U.S. Embassy in Beijing to the State Department in Washington. So this was one of these WikiLeaks cables that were just recently released, and in it, the U.S. ambassador is stating that listening to the radio, a report from the radio which quoted China's National Foreign Exchange Administration, they know that the U.S. and Europe have always suppressed the rising price of gold. They intend to weaken gold's function as an international reserve currency. China's increased gold reserves will thus act as a model and lead other countries towards reserving more gold. Large gold reserves are also beneficial in promoting the internationalization of the renminbi.
Right. And America, Tim Geithner, He's always pointing his finger at China, saying, you're a currency manipulator. Of course, he's referring to dollars and other fiat nonsense. China is saying, well, you're a gold and silver price manipulator. Who's going to win that battle? Gold versus fiat.
Well, it also brings into question, because this cable was written in April of 2009, and you and I were at the Bundesbank in March of 2007. And at that time, we asked the German central bank whether or not, how much gold China had. And they reckoned China had more than Germany did, and Germany has over 3,000 tons of gold. Now, officially, China only claims to own 1,000 tons, but by this report, it would suggest that, in fact, the Bundesbank was correct in saying at the time, in 2007, China had more than 3,500 tons of gold.
Well, let me repeat that, because it's really a Stacy Herbert exclusive. When we were at the Bundesbank, they told us, officials at the Bundesbank in Berlin, that they believed China had more gold than Germany does, which means that they would have more than 3,000 tons, not the stated amount of 1,000 tons. And that was 3-4 years ago.
It was an employee, it wasn't an official, but it was somebody who said that they obviously have no idea, but they suspect that they have more, that China owns more than Germany.
And of course, they are the biggest gold miner in the world at this time, and they're keeping all that to themselves.
So as this international financial and currency war escalates, here's another headline. Wall Street prepares for war. Yes, so that's an image of Lloyd Blankfein wearing camouflage and aiming a pistol. This is referring to the Financial Housing Finance Agency, the FHFA, who has filed lawsuit against 17 banks, including Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Société Générale, Credit Suisse, Barclays, and a few other banks. But that's my question here. Is this just a propaganda war? Because it's only a civil suit. It's not a criminal suit. Nobody will do any time for this. There'll be a fine paid. We already saw at the top of the show that an agent, the armed wing of the international bankers, the IMF, is basically threatening that the whole system is about to collapse if you force these banks to pay the $200 billion in fraudulent asset-backed securities that they sold to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
Oh, we know the Goldman Sachs response will be to threaten to crash the U.S. economy again using high-frequency trading, algorithmic trading, market manipulation. That's what they do. They have the exchange in a basically captive as part of their hostage-taking of America, and they threaten to collapse it if this investigation goes any further. Now, what the FHFA should do is that they should gather a bunch of hedge funds together, some friendly hedge funds, or create a few hedge funds of your own. It's easy enough to do. And they should naked short sell Goldman Sachs stock down to zero.
Listen, let's go to the next story, because I'll tell you, I'll prove to you that this is just a fraud, Max. And FHFA is not having any intention of doing anything to harm Goldman Sachs, because they are the same. They are JP Morgan. Subprime mortgage bonds getting AAA rating, S&P denies to U.S. Treasuries. So Standard & Poor's is giving a higher rating to securities backed by subprime home loans, the same type of investments that led to the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. Then it assigns the U.S. government. Now, these AAA subprime mortgage-backed securities, one of the participants of this is AIG, which is owned by the same government that is now suing these other guys for it's the same circle of psychopathic
schizophrenia.
Schizophrenia.
It's schizophrenia-backed bonds. Oh, that's exactly right. It's schizophrenia-backed bonds, and you can buy them on the exchange. But as you're doing it, make sure that you look at yourself in the mirror, collateralized by your own image. Slice and dice your image, buy the schizophrenia collateralized bond, and take a couple of antipsychotic drugs while you're doing it, and you yourself can become as rich as Lloyd Blankfein, who's sitting on trillions of dollars of fiat currency, which actually is worth nothing.
The article here quotes Gregory W. Smith, the general counsel for the $41 billion Public Employees Retirement Association of Colorado. And he says, everybody has been led to believe over the years that AAA means AAA means AAA across the board. Anybody that didn't learn in the 2008 crisis that doesn't apply should find another line of work. But there you go, again, this moral hazard, because it's up to whoever the Joe Bag of Donuts chump is running some pension fund for you. You have to hope that they learn their lesson, because the crooks are not behind bars. They are setting policy. They have Christine Lagarde threatening countries around the world for them.
Yeah, well, the rating agencies use the ratings to destabilize the market, to create volatility so that their friends can make money trading things like the volatility index, the VIX. If you have advanced knowledge about what the rating agencies are going to do, and they give out that advanced knowledge to their friends on the exchanges, you can buy and sell the VIX, the VIX, the volatility index, and make money that way.
Well, okay, so if you think this is all accidental, again, like that this is going to stop, let's look back at another cable. Viewing Cable 07 Paris 4109, Paulson discusses financial markets Iran with Sarkozy. So this goes back to 2007. Hank Paulson was here in Paris meeting with Nicolas Sarkozy. Sarkozy raised concerns about subprime-related market turbulence. Paulson, however, underscored the importance of not overreacting. He said it would take months, not weeks, for credit to be repriced, but this was not a major crisis. He went on to say, anyway, it's not a problem. The only problem I see in Europe for the banks is the German Landesbanken, but they presented little systemic risk and would be bailed out by the German taxpayer.
So Hank Paulson is speaking on behalf of the German government in terms of his plan to allow for the German banks to be bailed out by the German citizens.
He's speaking for the global elite. This is always their intention, Max. It's savers versus speculators. He's negotiating. The speculators rule, and that he knew from then, a year and a half before he pretended, oh, I hated to have to do TARP. Well, he was speaking to Sarkozy a year before TARP, saying, oh, don't worry, it's not going to be a problem because the German taxpayer will bail out the German Landesbanken.
Let me ask you this. What if Germany decided to demand the gold held at the New York Fed? 60% of their gold is held in New York. What if they did like the French and said, we want all our gold sent back to Germany?
It's forever gone. No European nation, no Asian nation, including China. They have a lot of gold in the U.S. They're not getting it back. And then finally, Max, one quick headline here before you turn to the second half. Israelis turn out for largest economic protest. So remember, Max, I talk about the breakaway wealth. This is the same situation that is happening in Israel because even though Israel emerged from the global financial crisis relatively unscathed, the economy is enjoying rapid growth and unemployment is at its lowest in decades at around 5.5%. So it all looks good on the surface, right? Regardless, statistics show the ranks of the working poor have grown dramatically as wealth has increasingly become concentrated among a small group of tycoons.
Well, you got to go now change the nomenclature from the Arab Spring to the Arab-Israeli Spring.
Well, yes, actually a lot of the people, the protesters are claiming alliance with the Tahrir Square.
Of course.
And also, this final image here, Max, this is Crash JP Morgan buy silver in Hebrew.
Shalom. All right, Stacy Herbert, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Don't go away. Much more coming your way, so stay right there. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to go to Germany and speak with economist Shir Hever. Shir, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Hi, Max. Always good to speak to you.
All right, Shir, Israel has been hit with protests over the summer with 400,000 protesting last weekend. Why is 5% of the population of Israel protesting? What are the demands?
Well, we have to ask ourselves, why didn't it happen before? Because actually Israel is undergoing a deep social crisis for the past few decades. with very rapidly growing inequality, uncared for poverty and uncared for unemployment, which have been expanding and affecting every aspect of life in Israel. And yet most people didn't really protest until very recently. And this wave of protest is something very new in Israel, quite unprecedented. There's never been such a large demonstration in Israel's history. And people have a lot of reasons to protest.
Okay, now is it possible that the Arab Spring, the Arab uprisings in Egypt, Tunis, and around the Arab world gave cover to these protests in Israel? And if so, doesn't this speak toward a greater Mideast society getting rid of all of these divisions that have been plaguing the region for decades?
The first reaction in Israeli society to the Arab Spring was panic, actually, because the idea that Arab countries could be democratic and the people can set their own destiny was something that intimidated a lot of Israelis who were counting on U.S. support in crushing the Arab peoples and making sure that they operate within the framework of U.S. interests, which also works very well for the Israeli Middle East strategy. But I think with the global excitement about the Arab Spring, especially the revolution in Egypt, a lot of Israelis said, well, we also want to get some of that international excitement. We also want the world to be excited about what we're doing. I think one of the reasons for this is that there is now an international boycott campaign against Israel, against the apartheid that Israeli society applies against Palestinians in Israel. And Israelis feel very isolated. They're feeling that they're pariahs in today's world because of this boycott campaign. And so by emulating the Arab Spring, they're hoping maybe to get some international support.
Okay, now you mentioned, of course, the relationship with the U.S. and the enormous support the U.S. gives Israel every year for decades. And the commentators in the American press who are covering this at all, the uprising in Israel, they're finding it difficult to talk about the demands of the protesters because the demands of the protesters are for things like greater distribution of wealth and greater equality in income distribution. And these, of course, are ideas that America equates with socialism and communism. So there's an enormous disconnect here because America aids Israel billions of dollars every single year, and yet the people of Israel don't seem to want to emulate what's happening in America at all.
I would say the majority of the protesters are talking about raising taxes. They want higher taxes so that there will be a sufficient income to implement social programs and policies that they're asking for, which is the complete opposite of the main discourse in the U.S. that taxes are considered the root of all evil and any call for raising taxes is immediately equated with communism. I completely agree with that. But we have to remember that this is rooted in Israeli history because Israel used to be, unlike the U.S., a corporative society which had a very strong welfare state and a very strong system of unions that worked for Jewish citizens, only Jewish citizens, for the elite of society, with collaboration with the government and with the major employers, to create a kind of society where there were very strong social policies, but only for Jews, mainly for Jews who originate from European countries. And this is a memory that appeals to a lot of young Israelis who, in today's neoliberal economy, find that they can no longer count on the government to help them in finding an apartment. They can no longer be sure that their wages will be enough to sustain their standard of living. They get very worried, and now they're saying, let's go back to what we had with the welfare state 30 years ago, 40 years ago and more.
All right, so the people of Israel are for peace and justice. They're out there, a huge percentage of the population, 5% of the population is in the square, in the streets, protesting for peace and justice. However, the government of Israel, of course, is attracting huge aid from America by playing the violence card, by playing the terrorism card, by committing acts of terror in Palestine and around the region. Now, let me ask you a question then. When you see a U.S. politician like Sarah Palin wearing a Star of David, she's not identifying with the people of Israel, isn't she? She's identifying with the government of Israel, who is basically, what she's saying is she's for senseless slaughter of innocents, and therefore she should be president. Isn't that kind of what's going on there? Isn't that the message?
Let's make it very clear. The United States does not give aid to the Israeli society at all. The U.S. gives $3 billion every year to the Israeli government, but the money comes in the form of vouchers by which the Israeli government can only buy American-made weapons. So let's be very blunt about this. This is a subsidy to the U.S. arms industry. That's what this money is for. So when Obama or Palin or any other U.S. politician are talking about sustaining the friendship with Israel and the long-standing alliance between the U.S. and Israel, what they're actually saying, the U.S. will continue to subsidize the arms industry and make sure that the Middle East will continue to be very volatile, very violent, so that Israel will continue to buy weapons, so that the neighbors of Israel will continue to buy more weapons, and that will create huge profits for the U.S. arms manufacturers. Does that make the life of Israeli citizens any better? Certainly not. But it does make the life of Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu better, because he knows that the one weapon he still has by which he can silence the protest, or at least he's hoping to silence the protest with, is war. If there's going to be another war in the Middle East, if there's going to be a violent clash with the Palestinians or with Lebanon, then or with Iran, then in the name of a state of emergency, he can recruit the young people, and they'll no longer be in the streets and the plazas demonstrating. Instead, they will be in uniform fighting a war, and that will be the end of the protest.
I asked my Twitter account, Max Keiser at Twitter, to ask you some questions, and one of those questions referred to war, and I'm going to get to that in a second. But before I do, let me continue on these protests. So you're saying that the needs of the warfare state, and Israel is primarily a warfare state, cannot go along pari passu with the welfare state. So the protesters how are they going to square that circle? Is there any way to transform the Israeli economy, which is currently now almost entirely contingent upon war? How are they going to transform the Israeli economy? What can they do to make Israel something less of a pariah and more of a functioning economy that's interested in the betterment of itself and those around it?
The Israeli economy is not really contingent or mainly upon war. The military part of the economy is about 12%. That's a lot. That's more than any other country in the world, probably. But it leaves 88%, which is not military related. And these 88% are most of the people. That's where people, where you find the doctors, the teachers, the social workers, people who are barely making ends meet. Without addressing the deep roots of injustice in Israeli-Palestinian society, in the fact that there are millions of Palestinian refugees who have every right to return to Palestine, but they're not allowed to without addressing the issue of the fact that Israel defines itself as a Jewish state, so that Palestinians cannot be equal citizens in Israel. Without these issues, and of course the occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, where about a third of the population are not citizens, they're subjects without any rights. Without addressing these three issues, there's not going to be a real change in the way that the Israeli society works. But we were talking before about violence, and should the demonstrators use violence? I would say very clearly the protesters should not turn violent. They don't need guillotines to change Israeli society. They need to do exactly the opposite. They need to refuse to take up arms. And any young Israeli who refuses to become a soldier for yet another imperialist war in the Middle East, yet another kind of distraction by the Israeli government to distract from the social issues, they're going to bring the real change. They're going to allow the most important issues to come to the fore, the issues of justice.
Well said. So do you believe the tipping point of a mass movement toward refusing to serve in the Israeli Defense Initiative is upon us?
For the first time, there is a clear understanding of most of the protesters that it's likely that the government is going to try to use war to silence the demonstrations, and that the security excuse is really nothing more than an excuse. And that's something very new. That has never been the case before.
Fred Maestro, What role has the increase in food prices played in regards to the recent mass protests? Any chance that it could lead to more food-related riots?
The food prices were the trigger for the riots. The first thing that protesters organized, the first kind of protest, was the protest over cottage cheese prices. And they did this by use of Facebook and Twitter, and they organized a massive consumer boycott within Israel. And they were excited by the success of this campaign, and I think that was one of the reasons that they felt more confident to move into other issues, because the cottage cheese is important, but it's not the most important thing. There are things that people need much more acutely than the cheese. But yeah, food prices in Israel are actually very expensive, more expensive than they are in countries where the income per capita is double. And the reason for that, of course, is the massive burden of security, the cost of the army, the cost of the occupation.
All right, second question comes from Random UK Human on Twitter. He asks, what is the probability of Israel attacking or blowing up Iran? This is the big question.
Yeah, this is a very big question, and I'm not a prophet. I wouldn't be able to answer this, but there is a real risk. And unfortunately, the world community is not doing enough to try to prevent this kind of war, which could be catastrophic. Iran is doing, at the moment, nothing to provoke Israel into attacking. But Germany, for example, actually is selling Israel submarines that could be used to launch such an attack. I think one of the beacons of hope, at least for me, is the worsening relations between Israel and Turkey mean that it's much more difficult for Israel to send its planes over to bomb Iran without cooperation with Turkey. So maybe there is also a silver lining to that story.
Okay, Shir Hever, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
And that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Shir Hever. If you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.